So long range follow-up, I forget what episode it was and exactly how long ago it was, but one of my action items from Think and Grow Rich was this personal communication room. And like we were chatting about before we got started here, my office, I am happy to announce, is almost done. It should be done early next week. I've got paint on the walls, and so all that's left is the door, the trim, and the bookcase, which I believe all the wood for that is stained already, and the contractor is going to be putting it in end of this week and beginning of next week. So that is super exciting.
So you have a new bookshelf going in. All of this, and that's the part I catch. So,
yeah, well, I figured I need somewhere to store all these books. Actually, it was highly encouraged by my wife, who literally said, either find a place for these books or I'm throwing them out, because they're kind of in stacks all around our bedroom at the moment.
Nice.
Yeah, the Schmitz house is kind of in flux at the moment because I shared with you that Rachel's mom has been living with us for a couple of years because she was a single parent. Rachel's father, and hopefully she's okay with me sharing this on the podcast, died in a car accident when she was really young. So her mom has done everything that she could to provide a great future for her kids. She's taken jobs that she had to, and a couple of years ago she was in childcare and hurt her back. The situation wasn't a good one. She had to fight to get basically the employer. It was a workman's compensation issue. It happened at work, but they were fighting it. And so she was in a tough spot. She needed to have major back surgery. She was living in a basement apartment. And we're just like, that's not going to work. Come stay with us until your back is better. So she had surgery. That was a couple of years ago. She's been going back to school. And she's going to graduate, I believe, either this summer or next winter with a communications degree. So she's kind of hit the reset button, and she moved out at the beginning of February. So she now has her own place. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of like sending your kid to college, like they're leaving the house, except it's your mother-in-law.
Yep.
So I will say, though, that I am really proud of her. She's worked really hard to get to this point. She's got a full-time job lined up. It's been really cool to see how she's kind of completely changed her life through this process. So she's moving out. My office is getting done. This is happy days at the Schmitz house.
That does not sound like an easy transition for her either, to be moving in with her daughter and spending 2 years there. Like, that sounds like it can almost come across as almost humiliating, I guess. I'm thinking about in later years, if I had to move in with one of my daughters to get by, like, that just sounds like a humiliating thing for me. Maybe that's me as a male, I don't know, to admit that I would have to need that help. But kudos to her for being willing to work through that and not give up and go back to school. Like, that's nuts. So congratulations.
Yep. Good job, Shirley.
And on that note, you get a new office space now.
I do.
But you said these things like they were willy-nilly, like it wasn't that big a deal, like trim and a door and a bookcase, like no big deal. But are you doing those? Or are you hiring that out?
No, I am not doing any of this.
Okay.
I have no woodworking ability whatsoever. So.
All right. Do you own a saw? Maybe I should ask that question.
Nope.
All right.
I own some screwdrivers.
Okay.
I think I bought a Black & Decker drill at Walmart when I was in college.
Oh. All right.
Yeah, I don't do tools, sorry.
Black & Decker. Ugh, Mike. Oh, Mike. All right.
See, I threw out the brand just because I knew it was going to get a reaction from you.
Yep. Thanks for that. All right. Okay. We need to move on. Like that. All right. So we've got a couple other follow-up items here. That one's long range. I'll give you that. That's been a while back. How long ago was Think and Grow Rich? When was that one?
To be honest, I don't even know. I probably should have looked it up before we started recording, but I did not. So
Think and Grow Rich was episode 34. That was September 14th, 2017.
Yeah, so it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a couple weeks. Yeah, for sure. You have another one on here. Read for tomorrow as well as for today.
Dang it. You weren't supposed to ask me about this, Joe.
I wasn't? I'm asking you anyway.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I saw this on there. I didn't put it in the follow-up section because I wasn't sure how you could hold me accountable for this, but I will say that the MindNode files that I create for the books that we read have a little bit more structure. And I think that that is going to be my successful completion of this action item, because I believe that I've made it a little bit easier where I can go back into one of these MindNode files and understand just by looking at the major nodes what the book was about, because it more closely follows the book outline as opposed to just here's a node for all my action items and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. And a lot of people have shown some interest in your MindNode files for sure. You were considering sharing these things at one point. Have you decided on that?
I will share them. I don't really have an issue sharing the content of them, other than, as I mentioned when we did the last episode, that most of the time I'm reading a physical book and I'm taking notes on my phone. So that means that there's a lot of misspellings, and occasionally there's even things where I go back and I read my notes and I wrote something down wrong and I can't figure out what I messed up. So I want to make sure that they're clean and coherent before I would share them publicly. But
why? Just post them raw.
Yeah, maybe. If enough people ask, then I'm sure that I'll share them as is. But I have been going back and just cleaning up a few things here and there with the intention of at some point making these available. I'm thinking that I'm probably going to revamp my personal website somewhat in the style of like a Jason Snell. I think maybe you do this too, where he's got like a short description of all the different podcasts that he's creating, all the different content pieces essentially that he's creating. He's got a different post for each of those, where the main feed would be that sort of thing. And then if you wanted to join my my email list, which I don't even know what I would do with that at this point other than start building an email list, that would be a campaign that I would set up then, where I could just upload these files, and then whenever we release a new episode of Bookworm, that those would go out. But I haven't set all that up yet.
Okay. So there was a piece in here that I want to call out, and it was that you said if enough people ask for these MindNode files. So that being said, listeners, at Bobblehead Joe on Twitter, nail him.
Oh boy.
I think you should post these. I'm going to join the crowd. Every time I see one of these, I'm going to join. So hit him up.
All right, fair enough. Well, let me just clarify this by saying that I will at some point make these available, but if people complain loud enough, I will probably make them available sooner. No promises, I guess.
If probably
the squeaky wheel gets the grease, as I was told recently when I got, well, it's not official, but I've got I guess I'll just say I will most likely be presenting at MacStock this year, but it's not officially. And one of the things the guy told me was like, okay, I get it. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. You were probably in from the beginning anyways. Let me sift through the 3 dozen proposals that you sent over and let you know which one I like.
So you're persistent. We'll give you that.
Yep.
All right. So I have a piece of follow-up here. This template for reading a book in Bear that actually didn't land in Bear. It ended up being in Text Expander because I ended up setting up it's a workflow that I'd created that very simply adds a new note to Bear. And then once it's created that note, I just run the text expander snippet in Bear, and then it recreates it right there for me. So it's not exactly a Bear template, but it kind of acts as that, because I can't help myself, and if I'm going to automate something, or if I can automate it, I will. So yes, that's what I have. So I'll try to make sure we got a link to that workflow and those details in the show notes if you're interested in that. But yeah, I think that's what we got for follow-up. Did I miss anything?
No, although I am curious to see how the last book that we read influenced how you read this book that we are covering today.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. So I've got a number of things open because, podcasters, we always have 12 windows open, it seems like, when we're recording. But I have my notes up from reading Flow, which is today's book, and I am posting these. I posted the notes I had on how to read a book from last time on my collected site, which I haven't talked about here. I did start a new kind of a commonplace in the digital world website based on something that Drew, he started doing, and I got intrigued by it and built a thing around it. So anyway, collected.joebulig.com is where I've been posting this stuff. And it's random stuff, and I am not, this is why I tell you to post your MindNode thing without editing it, because I'm not editing this. And sometimes it's not even full sentences that I'm putting on this. And I have a few of those pieces in my notes for today's book, which I will post out on the collected site probably tomorrow or so. It'll show up there. And then I'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes as well. So that's why I say you need to post your MindNode file, and we'll just start posting our book notes. So everybody, Bobblehead Joe on Twitter. How many times do I need to say this through this episode?
That's probably enough. Right about there, I think, is good.
Okay, I'll keep bringing it up. I'm sure a couple more times would do it well.
Hey, by the way, shout out to Tulip Girl, who was talking to us about the last book that we read, and was asking questions about the MindNode files. She had asked me how many of them I do this for, and do I do it for every book that I read? And my initial response was, well, no, I don't do it for every book that I read. I don't have that many. Turns out I do have that many. Going through my MindNode folder in my iCloud here, there's got to be at least a couple dozen books that I've created these really elaborate MindNode files for.
Yeah.
And it is really cool to go back and look at these. I like growing this library, so I definitely see where like a collected.mikeschmitz.me or whatever that had these, like that would be kind of cool to see.
Yeah, so if you want, Mike, my site that I have, and any of the listeners too, the collected site that I'm running, it's running a theme for Jekyll that I wrote, and I wrote it in such a way so that it makes it easy for other people to create these sites for themselves. And mine is just running off of GitHub Pages, if you're familiar with that at all. So if you're a coder or developer of any sorts, you have a GitHub account. If you don't have a GitHub account, it's really easy to get one, like everything else. And they have a whole structure for setting up a website that's hosted right in your public repository that's there. And once you do that, you can, and there's instructions on my site on how to do that. So I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for that theme, because that theme spells out in the README for it how to set that up. So if you're interested, Mike, you can get this done, and you don't even have to pay hosting for it.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to Jekyllify me. I did take a look at your README. I've never used Jekyll before, and as I was reconsidering, like, what do I want my site to be, kind of what got me going on this was the fact that MikeSchmitz.me exists. It's got links to all the things that I'm currently building and producing, but the content on there hasn't been updated in like a year and a half. And that's just because a lot of the stuff that I publish someplace else. So thinking about like, how do I want to repurpose this? I kind of went the other way. I'm on a Squarespace trial at the moment, just because I know quite a few people who have made it work with Squarespace.
Squarespace.
I kind of like the idea of not having to ever touch my site in terms of maintenance. I just have to create the content. So I guess we could follow up on that, see if I'm still there in a couple of weeks. But so far, it's pretty nice.
Sounds lame.
I knew you weren't going to like that. And to be honest, it was one of those things that as a former web developer, and I will use the word former because I don't want any more client work, that I never thought I would do. But simplicity sometimes wins.
Fair enough. I get that. I've told a few people that if you want something really simple, set up a Medium blog. And I have a handful of clients that I do that for, just because they want something easy and they want the existing audience to just tie in. So there are places for things like that. If you're going to build it for yourself and you can, why? Anyway, that's me. I like to control.
Yeah, I just don't want Medium or Facebook to own my MindNode files when I publish them.
Fair enough. That's fair. All right. So today's book, Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I didn't look that up. I'm just going off of the way you say it, Mike.
Beautiful.
I'm hoping I pronounced that somewhat correctly.
Like an Olympic figure skater, you nailed it.
Yeah. All right. Triple axel and all, right?
Yep.
The Psychology of Optimal Experience is the tagline on this. It's a national bestseller. This book, I haven't gone back to check. I wish I had tracked how many books we've done for Bookworm that this one has come up within.
Yeah.
I would like to know that. I bet it's at least a third, if not half of the books we've been through have mentioned this one. Is that fair assessment?
Absolutely. So I don't drink, but you know how like on Mac Power users, they've got the Brett Terpstra thing where every time Brett Terpstra's name is mentioned, you take a drink. That's what it would be like for Bookworm with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Maybe we'll adapt it so you take a drink of coffee instead.
Yep. So I've got a note about a potential book I've played around with, a book about reading books or writing a book of sorts, basically summarizing all of these books that we read. And there's a list of things in that note that have like, things you must mention to write a nonfiction book of this sort. One is that you always need to mention Apple or Steve Jobs in some way and talk about how amazing that they are. And you typically, it seems like meditation or yoga or something of that sort tends to come up. And then you have to mention flow.
Just a random thought. How many people do you think cite this book simply because they can pronounce his name and it's so hard to pronounce that if you've heard it for the first time, you just assume the other person has really done a ton of research and really knows their stuff?
That's a good question. Because here's the other thing. Whenever people quote this book, I'm not certain that his last name, I don't know that it's always there. Like I see Flow by Mihaly a lot.
Yep, Mihaly C.
Yeah, I see that a lot. But I don't know that I see his full entire last name spelled out very frequently. I don't know why that is, but it's a cool name. I like it.
It is a cool name. And it's a really good book, too. It was honestly a lot better and a lot more approachable than I thought it was. But I also am very glad we read How to Read a Book before this because it gave me some tactics and strategies to approaching this book, which were really helpful. I think that like if you were just getting into the productivity space and you're like, what book should I read? What's the most influential book you've ever read? And someone tells you Flow, and this is the first book that you pick up like this, big mistake.
Right. Because it's philosophical, I would say. It's not tactical per se. There are a lot of tactics that are mentioned kind of in passing. That's not the purpose of the book, and he spells that out at the beginning, which I'm very grateful that he did, because I was kind of expecting a lot of tactics and the like to be mentioned, and I was able to pull that out in a lot of areas, but at the same time, it was very clear at the beginning that I'm going to talk about the stories around this, and I'm going to talk about the conceptual ideas that are encompassed within this concept, and I'm not going to go into how do you apply this. And he even says, I am leaving that to you to decode and decipher what that means for you, which I can appreciate, but I can only appreciate it because he said it. I get a little bent out of shape whenever books don't say that, and that's the way that they are. They expect you to interpret it, but they don't tell you that.
Yeah, it's very anti-current productivity space where it's like, I'm not going to give you any action items. You can figure out what action you're going to take.
Right.
And I think part of that maybe is the era in which it was written. My version was the bluish, yellow looking one. It's a paperback that I got off of Amazon. But I know that there is a hardcover version which was printed in like the 60s. Is that correct?
I think I have the same one you do, and I'm trying to get the copyright dates and stuff on it. It was originally written in 1990.
1990?
Was the original. A hardcover edition of this book was published in 1990 by Harper and Row. The one that I'm holding in my hand is a modern classics edition, which was published in 2008.
Yep. Yeah, that's the one that I have too. I guess I assumed it was older because I found this book in my parents' place in Door County. Long story short, they bought this house, which on the bottom floor is lined. It's like a finished basement, and all the way around the entire basement are these bookshelves that are filled with books, like every possible category, topic you can think of. Most of them are quite a bit older. And I found Flow in those bookshelves. Like the people moved and they just left all these books. So I found Flow there, and my dad actually took it, and he's reading it right now. But in that version, which was the old hardcover version, there was like a note that was typed on a typewriter, like a personal recommendation from a guy named Stuart, who was basically saying like, this book will change your life.
That's cool.
So I guess I just, for context, that's why maybe I thought it was a little bit older.
There's another one, Finding Flow, The Psychology of Engagement with Everyday Life.
Yeah, I know he's got a couple others.
But that one was written in 98.
So how long do you have to wait before your book becomes a classic? I mean, 1990, and it's reprinted in 2008. That's like less than 20 years. That seems a little weird.
It's modern classics, is what it says.
Okay.
Does that count?
Sure, I guess. According to the New York Times, anyways. But yeah, this is a really good book. I do think that it is a little bit dated in the content, which wasn't really distracting to me, but I don't know. I feel like my whole paradigm for this book has kind of been rocked because I thought it was older than it was. But yeah, like the content that's in here is really, really good. And maybe we should start with the definition of flow.
Yes. And I before we jump into that, I just want to say Mihaly is still around, last I knew. So he is, I believe, still teaching. I'm going to pull this up real quick. He's born 1934. September 29th. Oh, that's a day before my birthday.
Nice.
Yes, so he's still around. On that note, I'll let you define flow.
All right, so what is flow? And the definition that he uses in the book, which is really paramount to everything else we're going to be covering in this episode, is optimal experience. And I like that definition because I feel it's very open and you can kind of define for yourself what optimal experience looks like. But optimal experience, on page 3, he talks about how the best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limit in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult or worthwhile. So optimal experience is kind of the point when you're performing at your best. It's not necessarily the point when everything is just clicking and everything is easy, but it's the point where you're really able to perform at a level that maybe you didn't even think that you could reach.
Yeah, and I like that. And I think he goes through scenario after scenario after scenario of ways that this actually happens. And I learned that he loves tennis players and he loves athletes kind of in general. And what was the other one? Violinists? He mentioned a lot. I don't know. I felt like he had a lot of stories that were around these.
I checked both of those boxes, by the way, so I liked all those examples.
Yeah, that makes sense. I cannot resonate with really any of those. I was quite an athlete in high school, but that hasn't translated into today's world, really. But at the same time, I can resonate with the feelings that he's mentioning in each of these scenarios. So I wouldn't say I was completely alienated by those, but he did like them quite a bit. And I think part of that's because it's easier to explain a concept like flow where you're effectively losing track of time because you're so engrossed in the activity that you're working on, because it's a challenge and you have the skills to meet that challenge, but it's something that you definitely have to work at. And when you're working at it at that level, you tend to tune out everything except that one activity. And I have been there. I've done that a number of times, and I totally get it. And I like this concept of manufacturing this state of mind. And I like that he does spell out the components of flow, which hopefully we'll get to. But I think you're right in that this is an optimal experience, as he calls it, which I think is a really good way to explain it.
Yeah, so there's a lot here. Later on in the book, he has a diagram. It's page 74, which I'll just mention because it's relevant to our discussion of what flow is. Obviously, in the book, it's down the road a little bit. But the channel of flow basically shows that it doesn't matter what your skill level is at. What you want to do is you want to maximize your skill level wherever it happens to be. So if you're a beginner at something, if you're doing something in that area that is stretching you to your limits, so to speak, you're in flow. If you're somebody who's a professional in a specific area, then the degree of difficulty for the task that you're doing has to be elevated in order for you to achieve that state of flow. And the real takeaway here at the beginning is that the goal for people should not be to live a comfortable life. It should be to create a life worth living. And that happiness really has nothing to do with your comfort. He's got a lot of stories in here in addition to the sports analogies and the musician analogies. Stories about people who are in like small rural farming towns and they live a hard life. They work 16 hours a day, but they're in flow pretty much all day and they're super happy. So the takeaway here is that you can manufacture this flow in whatever area you need it to be. You just need to make sure that you're doing the right things in order to enter into that state. And I think for a musician or for an athlete, maybe it's easier to do that. Like when I was playing tennis competitively in college or playing basketball in high school, for example, soccer, those sorts of things, and you're competing against other people and, state championship games on the line, like you hear those stories, like it's easier to enter into a state of flow in that scenario than it is when you're like myself right now, 30 something. I'm not competing competitively. I'm focused on my family and things like that. How do I still manufacture that state of flow? I think that's one of the things that's attracted me to running, to be honest. We've talked about how my experience with running kind of creates that runner's high where, you feel like you're about to hit a wall. And then I would describe it as you're entering a state of flow. You push past that wall and you feel like you can go forever. You get done, you shattered your personal record and you're like, wow, I feel great. That's flow. And I can literally put on my shoes, go for a run. It's not dependent on anybody or any external circumstances other than maybe, if it's super cold outside or it's raining or whatever, like maybe those things could change my plans. But really my point is that there are opportunities to manufacture that flow regardless of your situation and regardless of what opportunities you have available to you. And so as I was reading this, the real thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around is where are those opportunities that are in front of me? On page 10, he talks about the problem arises when people are so fixated on what they want to achieve that they cease to derive pleasure from the present. I think that's a very real danger in the productivity space. You can be so long-term focused that you're no good in the moment. And I don't want to be that way. So I think that this book is a really good book, especially if you're into productivity, because it's kind of the checks and balances where a lot of the productivity books will say, you got to have a vision, you got to have a why. I believe in all that stuff. It's what got me to the situation that I'm in right now. But on the other side of that, like, don't be dissatisfied with your current situation. Look for ways to make what you have to do better. And that's what flow is all about, in my opinion.
So there's a lot there. And I do want to call out, it's easy to look at this state of flow, and it's easy to look at the examples that he gives, because the common denominator in the vast majority of those examples is the fact that they are physical in some way. They are cases where people are doing something with their hands. They are running a tractor. They are competing in tennis. They are playing some sports game. And although he continues to say and show a few examples of how you can do this without doing something physical, almost every time there's this physical aspect to it. And I kind of struggled with that, given the fact that like you and I work in a space where everything it's knowledge and information. It's not how strong I am. It's not how fast I am. It's not how skilled I am at doing something very particular with my movements. It's what I know and how I translate what I know into more information that I'm creating. And I don't know, did you notice this connection, and did you see a way to translate it very well, or do you think I'm just completely off base?
No, if I'm hearing you right, I think what you're saying is that there's a physical aspect to creating flow that he seems to go back to quite a bit.
Yes.
And I think that's true. I mean, he's got a whole section in here on the body and flow, and I've got a couple of action items associated with that, which we'll get to at the end. But I think that the flow isn't just a physical activity, although you can achieve flow through physical activity. I may go off on a tangent here because I read and I shared it last time, the Cognitive Connection by Kathy Kolbe, and that book just rocked my world, and my wife read it and she's really enjoying it too. I firmly believe that the conative connection, where it talks about the different ways that you're wired, and you've got your dominant mode, which for me is a fact finder, and then there's follow through, which is the systems or the processes that you would follow. If you've got documentation, it's easy for you, if you're a high follow through, to just follow the standard operating procedure and get the thing done. And there's quick start, which is where you just make stuff happen on your own. And then there's implementer, where you're physically manipulating things. So that's where a lot of like the physical exercise, the gardening, those types of things, they would recommend. And when I'm reading flow, I'm reading it in context of that book. Okay, so talking about like in the conative connection, they mentioned that you should have a leisure activity in one of your non-dominant modes. So my results are 7 for fact finder, 6 for follow through, 3 for quick start, 3 for implementer. That means that I should look for a leisure activity that activates my quick start and my implementer modes, because it allows me to disconnect from the way I have been functioning in those other modes, because you've only got so much fuel in the tank, so to speak, for each of those different modes. So that means when I have the time to just mess around and activate those other modes, I don't need to be performing at my best, so to speak, but I can still achieve flow in those states. Just because I'm not super skilled in those things that I would use a high quick start or a high implementer doesn't mean that I can't achieve flow. Going back to that channel of flow, it just means that I'm maybe not as skilled in whatever area I happen to be doing there. Maybe I'm not a super skilled gardener. So that means that it's actually easier for me to get into flow, because the task doesn't have to be that hard in order for me to get there. So one of the things that I've been thinking about as I was reading this book is, how do I activate those other modes and achieve flow? Because I think the value from the book that we read for today in flow is just get in flow as much as you can. The more that you are in flow, the happier you will be. The more focused your attention will be, the better the end result of whatever you're doing happens to be. So one of my action items here, and this is kind of going out of order, but I think it's very relevant to what we're talking about right now, is to think about how I can achieve flow in those non-dominant modes, which for me are the quick starter and the implementer. And also at the same time, as I was thinking through this book, like, how can I do that in a way where I am also spending time with my family? Because I've said over and over again, like, my family is the important thing to me. One of the things that I've landed on is I'm not a high quick starter. I'm not a high implementer, which means that I won't just sit down with a bunch of Legos and build something. Like, that's stressful for me. I'm like, where are the instructions? All right. But not for my kids. In fact, if I were to sit down and do that with them, that's when they would open up. That's when they would start talking to me. So if I approach that as, I'm going to switch my modes now, I've been working for a while. I've been activating the high fact finder, the high follow through. Now I need just something which is going to give me, it's going to change things up. It's going to give me a break. That's like the ideal activity. And I think that when you approach playing Legos with your kids as something that is going to help you be more productive and do better work, like, it's a lot easier to justify. So I really like how this book got me to make these connections using that syntopical reading that we were talking about last time, and just figuring out, like, what are the ways that I can achieve this, which I wouldn't normally default to.
So I think there's one of the aspects of creating flow, because we haven't really talked about what these conditions are that take you to this flow state. And the thing I'm working through mentally with some of like the work that I do is I do a lot of code. I do a lot of consulting work, and it's a lot of thinking time. So I spend a lot of time thinking, and that thinking and ideation process is difficult to manufacture this flow state with that type of work. That's what I have found. And I have an action item around this to try to work through some of it. So I don't have an answer here. I'll just preface it with that. But I know that some of the aspects of flow is the skill level involved. You almost gamify things if it's not a game in itself. He told a story about a guy who figured out this game of how he tapped his fingers and would use that process to kill time when he's in meetings he didn't want to be in. So like those things are interesting, but it seems like you have to create this game or this competition with yourself in some way, which in every scenario was a physical component that I can remember anyway. In every scenario, that's what he was getting at. And I don't know that it translates super well into the idea only and knowledge worker state. Like that was one of my bigger concerns with going through this is, although this flow state is something I feel like is very valuable, and I do enter it quite a bit when I'm doing, say, work around the house, or I'm drawing out designs for things on my whiteboard, but every case that I can think of where I've entered that, it's either a play or a game of some sort where I'm trying to get something brand new up and running, and I lose track of time when I'm doing that. Like I'm trying to get a new type of website up and running, so it kind of becomes a game of how do I get this up and running. So maybe that's the translation point right there, but it gets difficult for me to get that same state to apply when I'm doing, say, client work. So that's why I was asking the question, because I feel like it's an excellent state to work towards, but I feel like it's difficult to get it translated into the knowledge worker mindset.
Yeah, because the typical knowledge worker just thinks that they should be creating all the time, and there's no balance. And I think that in the book, he talks about how you have to have that balance. He mentions, I forget which page this is, the growth of the self requires opposite tendencies. It requires differentiation and it requires integration. So as that pertains to social situations, you want to be part of a group, but you want to stand out. I think that you can apply that to yourself as well with a lot of the stuff that I mentioned from the cognitive connection. So it's not just, I'm going to create, I'm going to code, I'm going to do these things for 8 hours a day, because that's going to be impossible. Anybody who does knowledge work for a living, like a writer, for example, a content creator, knows that if you just sat down at your keyboard and you wrote for 8 hours, you're only going to get a couple hours worth of productivity out of that particular session. So really the benefit here from flow, I think, is that you're balancing these different things, you're balancing these different modes, and that's where I think you're talking about the 8 components of enjoyment when you're talking about the characteristics of flow.
Possibly.
Is that correct?
Yeah. This particular part of the book, I think mentally I somehow jammed a bunch of things together, which isn't correct. So some of this I might be a little wishy-washy on. Okay,
let me go through these 8 components of enjoyment here, and then I want to come back and make a point regarding flow, because I think that there's something valuable in what you said. Like when you're trying to figure out something new, that's the gamification, like that's the thing that you enjoy. That's when you experience flow. It's like I said, if you're looking at that channel flow, it's a lot easier for you to enter into a state of flow, because the challenge of the task doesn't have to be off the charts in a particular area, because this thing is new to you. That's the thing that we seek, is that ability to enter into an activity, face a difficult problem, and then find the solution. Like we feel real satisfied from that. And that gets into these 8 components of enjoyment, where number 1 is it occurs when we confront tasks that we can complete. Number 2, we have to be able to concentrate on what we're doing. Number 3, the task has to have clear goals. Number 4, the task has to provide immediate feedback. So in your particular case, either you figured out how to launch the site or you didn't.
Yep.
Number 5, removes awareness and frustrations of everyday life. Number 6, allows people to exercise a sense of control over their actions. That's a big one. You have to feel like you are in control of whatever you're doing. Number 7, the sense of yourself disappears, but afterwards, this is interesting, it appears even stronger. And then number 8, the sense of duration of time seems to be altered. So there's a lot on that topic, especially with those last couple that pertain to productivity. I'm sure you've heard the statistics about the real cost of interruptions. And I think that's because a lot of people are just focused on executing in their dominant modes. So they have to do a task which has a significantly higher degree of difficulty in order for themselves to be, quote unquote, in the zone or experience flow. So that means when they get a notification, when their coworker stops in and says, hey, can you help me with this quick? And they break that state of flow, then when they start to work on that task again, they have to ramp themselves back up. So I have no doubt, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you are going to code a website and it's something that is in your wheelhouse, it's something that you're really good at, if you had enough time to just focus on this one thing, you could get into a state of flow pretty much every time. But the difficulty is you don't know how much time that's going to take. And most often you're going to have to stop before you get there.
Yes.
And maybe, you know, as a knowledge worker with control over your schedule, like you're able to provide longer work sessions and you can circumvent that. Great. Most people who work a day job, you can't. You've got an hour between meetings. And so how do you create flow there? That's the real challenge.
Yes. And as a developer in the type of development that I do, I need a 2-hour block. If I'm going to work on, say, a new plugin for Discourse, I need a 2-hour block. Like, if I don't have that, it's not worth starting. Like, that's my experience with it. And that might be because maybe I am getting into that flow state, but at the same time, I know that if I have less than that, say I have an hour to work on it, the first, 15, 20 minutes, I'm trying to get my head around the design of it, of sorts, and then I'll sit down to actually write the code. But I don't want to go too far because I don't want to get down a path that I can't finish, and then I'll be lost trying to get back into it. So it ends up being a pretty big waste of time if I don't have a decent block to get into it. So maybe I kind of have this flow thing figured out already, and I just don't realize it. So I maybe I'm headed down that path. Who knows? But I think I struggle to maybe put it into words as to the state that I'm getting into when I do that. And like I've mentioned this before, but the whole procrastination thing is a thing I struggle with. And the concept of getting into flow so that you're not focused on how much time is involved, but you're just engrossed in the activity, like that's incredibly appealing. And I'm very envious of people who don't struggle to start things like that. And again, it's a thing that I know that I'm working through. So that's why I'm asking the questions. And I do like those 8 pieces, like some of those really, really jump out at you. And, the ones that I think are most interesting to me, we must be able to concentrate on what we were doing.
Yes.
And we've talked about like Cubicle Nation before. If you're in that scenario, is it possible for you to concentrate on what you're doing? And for me, that's a very loud, resounding no. And that's partially why I don't ever want to work in that scenario again. So I know that that's a thing that has to be there in order to get this to work. And I think that piece by itself is a much bigger aspect to this than I think we're giving it credit for.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that I am probably very similar to you, but I do not think that it is impossible to manufacture flow in that particular environment.
Right.
But if you aren't careful, you're never going to get there because
Right.
everything in your environment is working against you. Page 2, he says, happiness is not something that happens. It is a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated, and defended privately by each person. A better argument for productivity could not be made, in my opinion. Like, that's what productivity is all about. I personally believe that productivity is not figuring out a way to get more done. It is figuring out a way to get done the things that are important to you. And he kind of really gets into that in this whole section here on attention. But the thing that I don't have any scientific data for, but kind of what I want to experiment with, and he didn't really call this out, but let's say you're in whatever mode, you've achieved a state of flow, and now you have to switch to a different activity. Can the state of flow, even to a minute degree, can it be translated from one domain to another? I kind of think that it can. So, for example, if I'm writing an article, recording a podcast, whatever, okay, I'm in a particular mode. I'm all jacked up talking to you right now. I get done with this, I'm going to be physically exhausted, okay, even though I've not really done anything, quote unquote.
Aw, thanks, Mike.
Well, you know what I mean? Like I'm standing here at my desk. Like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted after 2 hours of standing. I'm such a, yeah. But I know from experience that that's also like one of the best times for me to go for a run. So I kind of think, and again, no data to back this up, but if I'm in a state of flow right now and I get done and I switch my mode from whatever I'm doing to something completely different, and I'm able to achieve a state of flow there, And then once I get done there, I'm going to come back, switch my mode completely, go to the other end of the spectrum, do something else, and achieve a state of flow there. I kind of think that the more that you get into that state of flow, and this is kind of what Cal Newport's book Deep Work is all about, is the more that you get into that zone, the easier it is to get there. And so I think that recognizing that I have to switch between these different modes in order to, going back to the cognitive connection, in order to really maintain a state of flow in all these different areas, like if I'm able to do that, the end result at the end of the day is that I kicked its butt. But I think if you approach your day as, okay, I am going to work in the zone as much as I can. What's the thing I'm really good at? I'm really good at code, so I'm going to work on this client project, and I'm just going to crank out as much code as I can. I think that's a recipe for disaster. Because I think if you were to approach your day as like, okay, even if I've got 8 hours now to just do my deep work, the fact that it's harder for you to achieve flow for those things where you have more skill means that there's going to be, at least if you have an inner voice like me, quite a while before you enter into that state of flow where you've got somebody talking in your ear saying this is a waste of time. You're wasting your time. You're losing your productivity. You're going to get done today. You're not going to have anything to show for it. I think if you can kind of stagger your modes, it's kind of like the concept of eating your frog, where like if you are able to do something at the beginning of the day, you can look back at it and say, well, at least I got that done. You know, if I've set aside 2 hours to work deep and create this piece of content, and at the end of that 2 hours, either I've achieved flow or I've not achieved flow, but at that point, I'm going to go for my run. I'm going to switch my modes. I can be okay with the results because the next thing that I'm switching over to is another chance to achieve flow. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so, because a lot of what I see in myself is that I need to cycle between different modes throughout the day. Otherwise, I get exhausted.
Exactly.
And I can't keep... Like one of my struggles is a lot of my side projects involve code. Well, my day job is code, and that's fine, but I need something other than that to break them up, which is where time to sit and read is an excellent way to break those up, because one of the most commonly mentioned ways for the flow state to be entered is when you're reading a book. Like that is one of the most universal ways that people get into it. I mean, how many of us pick up a book and you're fully engrossed in it, and that's just a state. That's what we're talking about. So I'm with you. I think you have to float between those two. So I think you make perfect sense when you're saying that that's exactly what you do.
Yeah. So this is kind of long-term follow-up, I guess. Like I am convinced that if I were to apply context in the GTD sense, although context wouldn't work. So I'm waiting for the new OmniFocus where you've got the tags.
Or just use a notebook, Mike.
Or just use a notebook, or use things, or use to do, yada, yada, yada. Nope. I'm sold on the Omni Group's vision for 2018.
Okay.
But I cannot wait for OmniFocus 3 because I want to apply these tags to the tasks that I have to do by identifying which mode they are associated with. And then going back to the cognitive connection, part of the report that they give you when you take the assessment is you should spend so much time in this mode, so much time in this mode. I really want to try ordering my day by, okay, I've got this many fact finder tasks, so I can't do another fact finder task. I'm going to do something else, and then staggering those back and forth as I plan out my hyper scheduled calendar. I think that that's going to provide a lot of value. I just unfortunately can't. I'm not going to go through all the effort to identify all the tasks that I have to do with those particular modes right now, where there's not a real easy way to sort them.
That is very fair. Talk to me about, because you got another point here of what do you do with a book that's hard to read? And I'm curious what you're getting at with this, because it's a question that I think I want an answer to, because we come across a lot of books that don't always strike our fancy. That's probably the most tame way I can think to say that. We don't like them.
Yep.
And yet we persevere, we go through them. So what are you getting at with this question, and what is your answer to it? Do you have an answer to this?
Maybe.
Cop out.
So let me back up just a little bit and share a couple quotes from this whole section on the flow of thought as it pertains to attention, because these really stood out to me. Page 119, he says, unless a person knows how to give order to his or her thoughts, Attention will be attracted to whatever is most problematic at the moment. This is email in a nutshell. You lose sight of the things that are important to you, and the things that are urgent that other people are telling you need to do this right now, that's screaming at you. And unless you have the context of what are the things that I want to direct my attention and my focus towards, then it's very easy to say, yeah, I'll do that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't say, yeah, I'll do that, but only say, yeah, I'll do that when you recognize what are the thing you're not able to divert your attention to. And it's not just email. He also says to avoid this condition, people are naturally eager to fill their minds with whatever information is readily available as long as it distracts attention from turning inward and dwelling on negative feelings. Ouch. I believe this is why so many people will just zone out and watch TV, even though they don't really enjoy it. This is why a lot of people will spend time on social media, even though like the statistics show that if you're on Facebook for any length of time, you're actually more depressed than you were when you went on there.
Yeah.
Like I've always thought like, well, why would you do that? This is it. It's this any benefit approach. People are looking for that distraction. And with the smartphone, like if you don't tame your notifications, especially, you have an open portal for other people to distract you. So you have to train yourself in order to divert your attention a specific way. And so on page 120, he talks about the better route to avoid chaos in consciousness is through habits that give control over mental processes to the individual. There's lots of ways you can do this. I think one of the best ones is meditation, which obviously requires practice. Doesn't mean that you never get distracted as you're doing your meditation. I get distracted all the time. But just the fact that you are practicing mindfulness, that's important. Okay, so now how does that pertain to reading a book that is quote unquote hard to read? I think there's a lot of reasons why a book might be hard to read. The Amanda Palmer book was hard for me to read just because I didn't care about the details of her love life. There are other books, though, that, especially pertaining to the last book that we read, they talk about how you need to read difficult books. You need to read books that are above you. If you were to sit down with a book and there's a whole bunch of words on the page that you don't understand, having to go look those up in a dictionary, like that's a lot of work. Past me would have been like, I forget this. All right. So my question to you then is like, where's the balance here between reading a book so that you can get into that state of flow, which you're not going to be able to do if a book is difficult for you to read, and the value of, and where does that fall in balancing like the value of going through the book and struggling through some things and figuring some things out? I personally think that if it's a book that is challenging you mentally, for example, as you're reading it, that's the kind of book that you should at least push through to the point where you can, going back to those levels of reading, you can identify what the book is really about, what the author's arguments are. And at that point, if you decide that what the book's topic is just not relevant to you at this point, fine, don't read the rest of it. But I think it is unfair to the author to just start something and you don't put forth an honest effort to understand it and say, this book isn't very good. But I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I have a fair number of thoughts on this because I've worked through this a few times. And I know that there are a significant number of books that I have read that are easy. And I can get into this flow state. I read them with no problem whatsoever. I get excited about picking them up, and I tend to carry certain books around with me because I just want 2 or 3 minutes here and there to read them. I don't do that with every book, and I'll admit Flow was not a book that I did that with. It was not one that I felt like I got into the state of flow with, and I felt like I had to really work at it. Not a problem, and that doesn't typically affect my rating of it, other than it does affect, I guess, my enjoyment of having read it. And in this particular scenario, take Flow, for example. It's very philosophical. It's very idea heavy in the concepts that it's sharing. It gets to be a little bit repetitive. It's the same state of being that he's talking about, just in a lot of different scenarios, which is great and can be a little bit hard at the same time. So in this case, I felt like there were some areas of this that were maybe a little bit above my head, and that's fine. But this is one of those books that I use as a way to drive some of my focus habits of, okay, well, I'm getting distracted. I'm not really sticking with this one. My attention keeps wanting to bounce. And I need to regularly recall my focus back to reading the book instead of trying to figure out how I'm going to track my tasks for that day on paper, because it is the superior way to do things.
Debatable.
My little dig there. But I think in this case, Flow it's an excellent book, but it is a challenge, and it is one that I struggle. So I would say it's possibly in some scenarios hard to read. There are others, such as The Innovator's Dilemma, that is so epic in the world of bookworm that we refer to it frequently, that was very hard to get through because of the detail of sectors of industry that we don't really care for. And as a result, it was kind of above or, just way off on the side and not something we're interested in. I think of those as very hard. And although I rarely put a book down, because I tend to see those challenges as things that can help not only my ability to read, it can also help me develop that focus muscle, and it can help me learn things for the future that I may be able to prepare for later if I'm aware of them now. And, The Innovator's Dilemma is a great example of this, because it spells out in that book how to stay relevant in an industry and how to make sure that you are not falling behind your competitors or letting the small guys come in and overtake your business. And those concepts are things that I use regularly and I know I use them on a weekly basis in today's world. I wouldn't say daily, but I do use them weekly, and not necessarily in my own business. I tend to do that with a lot of my clients that I'm consulting. So it is a thing that I have learned to use. However, when we read that book, I didn't see those connections and never used those concepts at all. That was something that I grew into. I think that's a good example of what you're getting at here is, this is something that I'm going to use in the future. It's a pain to read right now. I don't want to read this because it's a challenge. And yet persevering through that difficulty can lead to future dots being connected that I can use in future experiences.
Yeah, not everything worth doing is easy.
Yes.
In fact, most things that are worth doing aren't easy. And so regardless of the activity, you're going to have some sort of why or motivator as to why you should be doing the thing in the first place. So maybe you pick up this book and the only why you have is because you heard us talk about it on Bookworm. Maybe that's a strong why. Maybe it's not. Maybe you pick it up because you really want to understand how to improve your life. There's a lot of stuff in here that talks about that as I was thinking through and synthesizing this, I kind of landed on this formula, which isn't necessarily Mihaly C sanctioned, but working backwards, like what do people want? It's not an easy life, it's a fulfilling life. Well, how do you then achieve happiness or fulfillment? It's from being in flow. How do you get in flow? It's by directing your attention. Like if you were to focus on one thing that you could do today, it's directing your attention on the things that make the difference that makes the difference, as Tan would say. So I think that if you're going to approach a book, even if it's difficult to read, that's completely fine. You may just muscle through it and with the intention of getting a specific thing out of it. There may be books where you muscle through it and there really isn't a whole lot of value there. I think maybe The Innovator's Dilemma kind of applies in that sense because we don't, I'm not running a steel company or any of the other examples that he had in there. So it's a little bit harder to make those connections. For a knowledge worker who writes content for the internet, maybe there's not a whole lot that applies there. So other than reading it for Bookworm, maybe that's one where you're okay pulling the plug. But I think that the main takeaway here is to understand that there's going to be some things that will motivate you to push through some things that will make you uncomfortable. And that's going to be necessary in order for you to achieve a state of flow. Now, also what's interesting about this, especially on the topic of like reading a book to get into a sense of flow, there are definitely different types of books. And I think that depending on the type of book that you're reading and the way that you're reading it, it can be easier or more difficult to get into a state of flow. This one in particular, not very easy to get into a state of flow where you're just cranking through the pages and devouring everything that he's saying, because a lot of his arguments you have to stop and think about if you're really going to understand them. Now, on the flip side, I read to my kids every night. So if I'm reading Goodnight Moon or Old Mama Squirrel and I'm doing all the voices for the characters, like I can get into flow that way. And it's a lot easier than spending 20 minutes reading flow. So I think also it's, that the type of book and your expectations from it, what you're going to get out of it are important. Well, let me just talk about this work as flow section, because I really got a revelation from this. So he talks about how there are a couple different ways to experience flow at work. You can either change the constraints into opportunities for expressing freedom and creativity, or you can change the job itself until the conditions are conducive to flow. So you can either change the situation or you can put yourself in a different situation, kind of is how I read that. But what's interesting about this whole section is that people most often experience flow in work over 50% of the time, compared to over 50% of people who experienced apathy during leisure. So this really just drives home the point that what people want is not an easy life, but a fulfilling life. You have to have a purpose and a meaning, which he gets to at the end of the book, behind the things that you are doing. I mean, a lot of people work hard, they make money so that they can have more leisure, right? That's the popular belief. But what he's saying here is that when you're spending time in leisure, half the time you're not happy that you're in the leisure activity that you're working so hard to get to. Like that just kind of blew my mind. And it made me think, maybe we're approaching work the wrong way. I believe that there is no work-life balance. There is just life, and you have to balance it. And you do have to have balance or intentional imbalance, if you will, according to the 12-week year. Tip the scales in your favor, because you're never going to have enough time to do all of the things that you want to do. But this really got me thinking. I have long been a proponent of boundaries and making very, very strong, rigid statements like, I'm not going to do this after this time. This book got me rethinking that. And I know that there is value in those boundaries for protecting the time for the things that are most important, which for me is spending time with my family. And those boundaries were extremely important when I was in an office job and I had the opportunity via email, via project management tools, to be thinking about work when I was home with my family. That doesn't happen that often anymore. I've done a pretty good job at tooting my own horn. My wife can, I guess, correct me. She could email in and say, actually, you're not doing so hot, if she sees it differently. But Mike today is very different than Mike 5 years ago in terms of the intentionality and the mindfulness, being present when I am with my family. And so my thought process here as I'm reading this book about flow is that if I experience flow when I'm at work, and the more flow I experience, the happier I am. The happier I am, the happier everybody around me is.
Yep.
Maybe I should work a little bit more. And I'm not just saying I'm looking for more things to do, but maybe be okay with the fact that I'm in flow. Like, let's just push through and finish this cycle and finish this article, whatever. And yeah, maybe I spent a little bit more time on this thing than I had originally intended to, but not being so hard on myself for doing that, since that's really the thing that's going to make everything else better in a sense. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, because I talk about this whole time balance process with my wife quite a bit, and it's not easy. It's a fight in some ways for the time in the right places. But one of the things that I tend to tell my wife is I don't want my work to be a job. I want work to be an extension of who I am. That's what I try to do. I love building things online, and the best way I found to turn that into a moneymaker is to do it for clients. So I love what I do, and I love helping people solve those problems. It's easy for me to lose track of time when I'm with someone in person working through things with them, and like that's an easy thing for me to do. But at the same time, it's easy as well for me to spend too much time on that. And it's not easy. Like that, it's definitely a tension and a balance of how much time do I spend doing the things that I love for other people versus doing them for myself versus doing them for my family. And to me, that's the balance and tension that you're talking about. Is these are all things I love doing. I love writing. I love playing with especially my kids. I love hanging out with my wife and talking about the books and the ideas that we're each coming up with or reading about. And, those are fun things. And it's obvious that you and I like talking about books because we run a whole podcast about it. And I would imagine you talk to your wife about some of the books you're reading. I do the same. Like that is an extension of our work, but it's outside of work as well. Like there's a very blurry line there. So I try to think of it as these are all activities that I love doing, that I get enjoyment from, but who I'm doing them for is somewhat of the delineation that our culture and society has created around this concept of work-life balance. It should all be the same type of activities, at least in our cases, just directed for different purposes. Is that, I don't know, do you follow that train of thinking?
Yes, I think I would add a little bit more context to it just because people like you and myself and probably a lot of people who listen to this show, they've got side hustles, side projects, things that they are working on outside of work. That's the thing for me that has typically fallen into that category of I feel bad about working on this thing because I should be not working right now. And so I guess my point from reading this book is like, why do I feel that way? Why should I say to myself, I should not be doing this thing if I really enjoy doing it and it's not stealing time from the things that I've prioritized as most important? Like if it fits, why not do it? One of those things is screencasting for Screencast Online. Like I just finished up a module on MindNode last weekend as we're recording this. And that's one of the main reasons I'm looking forward to having that office done in my basement is I want the studio where I can go record that right now. If I want to record something for a screencast using a good microphone and having a quiet environment, like I have to get in my car and I have to drive 20 minutes to the co-working space. Then I got to walk to my office, get everything hooked up, get everything set up, start recording. And if I just am not feeling it that day, like, what am I going to do? Get back in the car and go home? No, like I'm here for the next 3 hours. I'm going to finish this thing, dang it.
Right.
And it makes the activity sometimes not enjoyable. And I was thinking like, well, why? Like I love doing this sort of thing. And I think that this is why, is I want to be able to flow in and out of these modes. And whenever I am in the space where I've got a high amount of energy and motivation in this particular mode, like this is the time that I should be working on this thing. I just think that that's going to make everything so much easier. And I think balancing those modes is more important than keeping a cap on the number of hours that I quote unquote work. And obviously, there has to be a balance here. You have to keep the main thing. So for me, I have to be very careful that the time that I have budgeted for my family does not get affected. And then also the time that I've committed to the other things, that can't be affected. If all of a sudden I have all this other time and I'm in flow all the time, that's great. But if it means I'm not getting stuff done for Asian efficiency, like that's not good. So there's a balance between all these different areas. But my point here is that it's not as simple as work and life anymore, or even work and personal. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. There's a lot of different levels. It's pretty complicated, but this book made me kind of rethink how I classified those things and really just challenged the traditional idea of, well, I've got to have this much time to rest. Yes, I do need rest time. I need leisure time, but I don't think I need to just say, I'm not going to do any more than this number of hours per week because like that's what a quote unquote full-time job is. I think that there's a balance to be struck here based on knowing myself and then balancing that within the context of all my other responsibilities, that can really help me. I hate to say like be more productive, but in the sense of making progress on the right things, I think that definition fits.
I want to disagree with you on one point here, and that is that this is a complex and difficult thing to work through. I think it's actually quite simple. I think we overcomplicate it because it's a simple process of if you're going to take on a side hustle, and that is an extension of what you love to do, it's a simple trade-off. Okay, you're going to work on this side hustle. And in my case, I tend to trade my client work for that side hustle. But the balance there is knowing how much I can trade that and still maintain an income that I'm comfortable with. If I'm not comfortable with the income that I have, then I need to scale back my personal project work. So, I've done that. Some people have seen that. It happens with whether or not I keep a project around or kill it. And it's that simple. I mean, if you want to do a side hustle or you have one that you feel like is eating your life too much, you need to scale something else back. And if that means spending less time with your family, that's your choice. I won't make that choice. And it sounds like you won't make that choice, Mike, but some people would. And it's always a trade-off. That is the full sum total of what we're talking about. Is if you want to work through something like that, and I don't even know how we got on this topic now, but the thing that's interesting to me is it's just a matter of trade-offs. That's all it is. And if you're not comfortable with where you're at on something, well, then do something different. Like, don't just keep doing it. That's the balance that I see. And for me, I know, like I've said numerous times here, is like, okay, well, code and helping people, like those are some of the things that I know that I love, and how I direct my attention for those is just a back and forth of choosing to do one for a client or choosing to do it for myself. And how much time am I going to dedicate to all of that? And then picking and choosing how much to put in each bucket that goes there.
Yep, totally agree. So let me just clarify this a little bit more, because I agree with you that on one level, this is simple. And the simple part in my mind is the mindset shift about your job. So one of the things I got from this section was that many people consider their job something they have to do. Well, I started thinking about the stuff that I get to do. And I'm like, my job's pretty awesome. My wife and I were talking about this last night. She's like, it's super cool that you get to do this, this, and this now, and that's your job. And I'm like, yeah, I know, isn't that? So the mindset shift of going from my job is something that I have to do versus my job is something that I get to do, that I think is the easy part. The hard part is recognizing all of the opportunities that are available to you and understanding whether they are positive or negative. So, for example, on page 69, he talks about optimal experience is a form of energy. And energy can be used either to help or to destroy. The goals to which is applied can make life either richer or more painful. That for me is the hard part, because it's never packaged so cleanly as like, this is good, this is bad. You start doing something and you realize that there are negative ramifications to doing this thing. Like you mentioned, if you're working on the side project and all of a sudden your family's falling apart, like that's a very negative thing, but it could appear, if you have the wrong perspective, as a positive thing at first. So that's the thing I want to be very careful about. And that's the thing that I think is difficult and is different for every single person.
That's fair. But you still have to work through all that. I think that's the part that I'm getting at.
Yep, exactly. And on this topic of families specifically, this was the next point on the outline. On page 178, he talks about, in his words, the illusion of family values. I'm curious, before I give you my thoughts here, I think you kind of know probably what I'm going to say. But what was your reaction when you read this part?
All right, so because he puts family values in quotes, and the quote-unquote family values that the elders spent so much effort inculcating in the young were a reflection of this simple necessity, even when it was cloaked in religious and moral considerations. And what he's getting at there is that families tend to pass down thoughts about how the world works to their kids. I mean, obvious. Kids watch their parents and they're passing that down. And he puts family values in quotes, I think because he's saying that it's something more than that or something different than that. So I can't say that what he's calling an illusion of family values. I can't say that I took exception with that, but I'm guessing that you did.
To a certain degree. I'm not going all 168 hours on this, but, but I do have thoughts. So with the way that Mihaly writes, he's very, very educated. He knows a lot about a lot of different perspectives and belief systems. I don't believe is a Christian, but he makes a lot of references to scriptural passages from the Bible and uses them to build what I consider to be very valid and strong arguments. However, I do think that there is a degradation of family values, and it is not an illusion, and it is a bad thing. And my basis for this really comes from employing the strategy that we talked about in the last book of syntopical reading and comparing it to 30 Lessons for Living, which I mentioned as one of my gap books. But what that book is, very briefly, is about 1,000 interviews that this guy did with people who were older that were part of the quote-unquote golden generation. So these are people born in like 1920s who went through the Great Depression, those sorts of things. Like they really had to suffer through some things. No one born after that point has had, at least in the United States, to go through anything of that magnitude since. So they have a very different and more valid perspective, I think, on this whole idea of pleasure versus pain and having to go through some things and understanding what true happiness is. Okay. I respect their opinions much more than my peers. And they all said the same thing, that the relationships are the important thing, and that a lot of that book is built on this whole concept of family values. One of the things they talk about is make sure your marriage is strong. Like, not it's good to have a strong marriage, which is kind of how I think it would be approached nowadays, and kind of the lens through which I viewed it when I read Flow. There are things you can do to make sure that you have a strong marriage, and then it's up to you to do them or not. It's not a complicated formula, and it's not magic where you're paired up with this person and either it works or it doesn't. Now, there are sometimes, things are not going to work out, but I believe a lot of the things that don't quote unquote work out, we justify as not working out because we are more pleasure focused as a society. There's a book, actually a whole series of books that by this guy named Ed Cole, who kind of is the father of the men's ministry in the Christian circles. And he has this definition of love versus lust, which I really like. He says, love is the desire to benefit the other at the expense of the self, where lust is the desire to benefit the self at the expense of the other. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that that completely applies to today's society. The phrase I use is that we worship at the altar of convenience. When this is no longer convenient for me, I'm going to chuck it and I'm going to find something else. We also really want immediate satisfaction. I want what I want and I want it right now. We're not willing to go through some things in order to see the end result. Talking about passion, for example, doing the things that you're passionate about, doing the things that you quote unquote love, doing the things that are important to you, like you were talking about a little bit ago. Mike Rowe, the guy from Dirty Jobs, said, don't follow your passion, but always bring it with you. I think that lunch pail mentality can apply to family values. And I think that's a little bit different than Mihaly's view. But in my opinion, family values are not only important, they are worth fighting for.
I think if you define them the way you define them, that's true. I think he's defining them differently.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's a disconnect in what you're calling values. I think what you would define as values is possibly what he would call beliefs or faith tenets of sorts. So I don't know that I would say you're at odds, but I can see how you got there very quickly.
Yeah, and I guess the thing for me is that while my beliefs, my values, quote unquote, are definitely based on a Judeo-Christian belief system, I would argue that there is a lot of empirical data that shows that families, societies are better in some sense based off of those values. Like, for example, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I did at one point look up the statistics of kids who are juvenile delinquents that come from single-parent families, basically like the homes without a father. And a lot of that comes back to the dad not accepting the responsibility of providing for the family. The mom got pregnant and the dad bailed. Like, That's not always a situation, but it's a situation a lot. As we're recording this today, when we get done, I am going to the Boys and Girls Club. Our church is hosting a free basketball tournament with them, and the people that we serve there, like there's a kid that goes there, a member of the club. He's like 12 years old, 350 pounds, because his mom doesn't know how to cook and feeds him junk food all the time. There's another kid who's worn the same shirt for 3 months in a row, so they're teaching them how to do laundry and stuff like that. Like, it breaks my heart to see that stuff. And I think that a lot of that comes back to a lack of these quote-unquote family values. I think that there are truths here that go beyond a Christian belief system. And I guess that's the thing. I don't want to really say like I'm at odds with this or I'm offended by what he said or anything like that. This is just my color commentary on what he said. I feel like when he was talking about this section, he glossed over it. And there's a lot more to be unpacked here that has a significant impact, especially in the context of discussing flow, not only as it pertains to the self, but in this whole idea of family. Because he's got in this whole section is enjoying solitude and other people. I laughed when I read that because I'm definitely not a people person.
Yeah.
My wife laughed too, and she saw it. She said, you're going to read this and you're going to figure out how to be more social. Well, kind of. But I think that there's a very real aspect of achieving flow that is based on your societal interactions with other people, whether they be in a family or in a community, however you want to define that. But the values play a big part.
I don't know that I would say he needed to spend more time on this. The thing that I think he did need to cover is the social aspect, like you said. But in the scenario of the different categories that he is spelling out here, is that is a small piece of it. So I don't think he wanted to go into any of them in a broad sense. But it does mean that he needed to touch on it at least a little bit. But I think if he'd spent that much time on that one topic, it would have dictated that he needed to spend that much time on each of the others as well. And then he's beyond the scope of what he intended to cover. That's my thinking.
Yep, and that's fair. I just wish I understood his real thoughts on this topic, because the way that he wrote it in this book, I kind of disagree with it.
That's fair.
But when Mihaly calls me, we'll have a chat.
Shoot him an email. Get it figured out.
There we go.
All right, so you've got down here page 198.
Yeah.
And this is about catastrophes. And I think I found the section you're talking about. Let me just read this quick, because it's talking about coping with stress or cheating chaos. That's the chapter that this is in. And again, page 198. A major catastrophe that frustrates a central goal of life will either destroy the self, forcing a person to use all his psychic energy to erect a barrier around remaining goals, defending them against further onslaughts of fate, or it will provide a new, more clear, and more urgent goal to overcome the challenges created by the defeat. And is that right? Is that the section you're talking about?
Yep, exactly. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I'm literally going through this right now.
All right.
Yeah, so there's two outcomes here. Number one, a major catastrophe can destroy the self, forcing you to erect barriers around remaining goals. Or number two, it can provide a new, more clear, more urgent goal to overcome the challenges created by the defeat. So my context here, I shared on Bookworm last fall how I competed in the humorous speech contest for Toastmasters.
Yes.
And I did much better than I thought I would.
Okay.
I made it to the district level, lost at the district level, which is really the finals, to a professional comedian. This spring is the inspirational speech contest, which is right in my wheelhouse. And in the meantime, I've gone through heroic public speaking with Michael and Amy Port. I've hired a coach. I've been working on creating like better content, better stories. That's where the whole story file came in, and felt like I was making a lot of progress. So we had the club level competition, which in the past has not even been a competition, and I lost. There's a lot of things around the specifics of the situation, which I'm not going to get into the detail. I don't want to make excuses, but my reaction basically was like, that's not fair. But what can I do about that? You know, I'm in the middle of a catastrophe right now because I did not win at the club level, which honestly, depending on your point of view, I guess, you know, maybe I should have, but I had my whole quarter mapped out. I had next quarter mapped out. Like, I'm going to go compete at this level. I'm going to get to this level. I'm going to get to this level. And to be honest, the speech that I delivered, like, I did a great job. It was awesome. I really do believe that I should have won, but I didn't. So what do I do now? Like, my goal, I told my speech coach, was to get to the World Championship of Public Speaking. And maybe that goal was too lofty, but I didn't even get past the first round.
Yeah.
So what do I do now? I find myself in this place where it's like, fair or not, there's nothing I can do to advance and compete at these other contests, which I was planning on competing in, the ones that I competed in last year. And I'm struggling at the moment to find a new, more clear, more urgent goal to overcome the challenges created by that defeat. So as I'm reading this book, I kind of find myself in this place where it's like, you got to be careful. You don't want to slip into that first category. But on the other hand, like, I don't want to just pick something to do instead, but I find myself having to pick something to do instead. This is a big part of my 12-week year for the next 2 quarters, and it's gone now. It's like not even an option. So I don't know what that thing is, but I do recognize, especially after reading this book, like, highlights the importance of you have to find the next thing. The failure isn't final. You know, I'm not defeated, just delayed. But in order for that to be true, I have to find the next thing.
Yes. And I guess my question to you is, have you looked at other speaking competitions that you could get engaged with? Because it sounds like you had yourself locked in on this one path and we're counting on getting down. And I'm sure there's all kinds of things you've unpacked of why. Which I don't think we should go through here, but
yeah, we don't need to have a therapy session.
Yeah.
But you're right. You know, I had somebody in my 12-week year accountability group, our local mastermind, who flat out told me, he's like, you got to get over this Toastmasters thing. Like, you put all your eggs in that basket.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're right. But I don't even know what the other options are. Like, that's what I was familiar with.
Well, at one point you were talking about trying to do a TED Talk, and you've mentioned a couple times.
Yeah, and I tried to do that, got nowhere.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And you've mentioned a couple times speaking at MacStock. So I guess my thinking is, why must it be a Toastmasters competition? Why can't it be a talk that you give to your church or a talk that you give at some other venue? Like, what is the lockdown on the competition that you can't get past?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I don't know specifically what the path looks like to my ultimate goal using any of those other vehicles, I guess. So specifically, the MacStock thing, I love MacStock. I'm really looking forward to being there, but that is like giving a technical presentation. Maybe my talk at MacStock changes somebody's life, but I don't know that for sure. I really do want to get into public speaking, though. And I really do believe, based on like the feedback that I've gotten and the progress that I've made, because even some of the people who heard me at the club level hadn't heard me in a while. They come up to me afterwards and like, wow, can't believe how much you've improved. Like, you're so much better than you were even a couple of months ago. Like, I want to be a professional speaker. I want to be on a stage, get paid to speak, and inspire people. And I don't know what the path looks like other than through Toastmasters, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. And my job is to figure out what that looks like. It's definitely not impossible. There are other options. I just have to learn how to see them.
Yeah, and I think this ties into the last point we've got here on our outline, is the meaning behind something, which I think is exactly what you're talking about, is what is the purpose behind this? Because I understand the competition piece, and this may actually be one of the more perfect examples of this, because he does go through a process in the book of explaining how you can get addicted to this state, and mentions surgeons. I guess that was another example he went through time and time again. Surgeons getting addicted to the state of flow, and other like chess masters who got addicted to it, who it ruined their lives because they got so into it. And in a few cases, I guess he actually mentions it led to suicide, just because everything outside of that state of being was so difficult to work with and so difficult to deal with that they just couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, which is why you have to be able to switch between those different modes and experience flow in different places, in my opinion. Because if you put all your eggs in that one basket, and the only way you feel flow is when you've got somebody's heart in your hands, literally, Like, that's not healthy.
All right, so let me turn your words back on you. It's not healthy when you're locked into one state of flow. And when you're looking at competition, it's very easy to reach that state when it is a competition. I guess my challenge to you would be to find a place that's not competition for speaking, because that's an area that I don't think I've seen you try to thrive in. I see you at MacStock, and that seems to work out well, but I don't know that I've heard much about you speaking apart from MacStock and apart from Toastmasters. Like, those seem to be your comfort zones. So I don't know if it's worthwhile trying to find someplace outside of that, but it seems like to me that if you want speaking to be the purpose that you're reaching for, you know, to use his terms here, meaning, if you want to find meaning in all of this, that seems to be the direction you should be heading.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody wants a keynote speaker for your next conference, at Bobblehead Joe.
So the moral of this episode is to tweet to Mike.
Yep.
Tell him to post his MindNode files and show him speaking gigs.
Right.
All right. So with all of that being said, and hopefully we weren't too much into your therapy session there, you have a handful of action items here. I don't know that we've really talked about much of them. Why don't you take us through them quick?
Sure. All right. So as is sometimes the case, I mean, sometimes we go through the structure of the book and it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes there's just way too much to get through everything, which is kind of the case right here. So this first one, we didn't really talk about this. We touched on it though, the body and flow. One of the things that he talked about for achieving flow with your body is to try yoga, which honestly, my wife has been trying to get me to try for a long time, and I think that I am finally ready to give it a shot. I say that reluctantly because I know as soon as she hears this, she's going to be like, come to my yoga class, and I definitely don't want to go to the yoga class, but I will try yoga. Also related to the body and flow is, and this isn't necessarily physically, I'm not quite sure how I got inspired for this one in this section, to be honest, but it has to do with the seeing skill. He made some comment about noticing details just in your everyday life. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. The more that you can notice those little details and the beauty and the simple things, that sort of thing, like the more grateful you'll be, the happier you'll be. Like, that makes a lot of sense. And so as I was thinking through, how can I develop my seeing skill? I've seen people do these like picture a day things, and they'll do them for like the entire year. I want to do this every day in March. So I'm not going to commit to the entire year, but I do want to try to do this for an entire month. And the goal here really is just to post publicly, Instagram or whatever, a picture that I've taken in any given day. And my focus on this is going to be not necessarily like the beautiful sunsets or whatever, although we're taking a trip to Florida, so maybe there will be some of those. But really just like the macro stuff, the everyday stuff. I want to challenge myself because I'm not really a photographer to try and see those things and then capture those things with a camera.
Do you have an iPhone 10?
I do.
So you have a great camera.
Actually, that's the reason I got it, to be honest. It's got the two different cameras, and I've always had, like, I think I upgraded from a 6S, and it always just had the single optical image stabilization camera. And I think every single picture I have of my 8-year-old is blurry because he just moves too fast. So I'm like, I am getting the nice camera this time, dang it, and I'm going to get some good pictures of my kids.
Fair point. Fair point. All right, what's your life theme?
Yeah, that I don't know. Well, I have an idea. I think we've talked a little bit about this before, but I want to refine it. And this is getting back to that whole idea of the making of meaning. He's got in that section, he's got his meaning system. I didn't really like his meaning system. I like Dave Ramsey's Legacy Journey one a lot better.
Yeah.
So he's got 4 stages, which is personal needs, community goals, personal potential, and then a cause or an idea. Dave Ramsey's is now, later, us, them. So the basic idea here is that you're going to take care of your immediate needs, then you're going to plan for the future, then you're going to look at the people in your family, then you're going to be invested in a bigger global cause. And so I want my life theme to be able to be played out in all those different areas. And I've said before, I believe on this podcast, that I want my life to be about helping people make the most of their time, their talent, their ability that they've been entrusted with, find their purpose, discover your destiny, do what you were created to do, that sort of thing. So I want to get that down to a single sentence. And then the other one I've got here is to consider how family time can become a flow activity. I've given a couple teasers, I guess, from things that I've already kind of discovered from going through this, where like I've discovered that story time at night can be a flow activity, and even something simple like playing Legos with my kids, that can be a flow activity with my family as well.
Nice. Yeah, I know for me, one of the things that I do, my oldest really likes to build puzzles. So the 1,000-piece puzzles or a 500-piece puzzle, we have one of those out quite a lot. So she loves doing that. So I love putting those together with her. So I totally get it. I've got a couple action items here. One I alluded to earlier is create competition of some kind within myself around my client work to help to generate some of that flow state. I don't know what this means, which might make it hard to know if I've hit it or not actually having it defined. So essentially what I'm trying to nail down is, can I somehow gamify it in that I quantify how long I think it'll take and then try to beat that, or see how fast I can get a project scoped and invoiced. Like maybe I'm doing something along those lines. So I don't know. I haven't figured it out, but that's a thing that I want to at least explore to help me with that flow state. Not only with the development side of it, but with the admin piece of it. So try to make it a little more enjoyable, other than, dealing with cranky clients here and there. But I don't feel like I get a lot of those versus what some people deal with. So my other one, I'm trying to visualize my day ahead of time. I've tried to do this before, and I just haven't been able to make it a habit. And he mentioned in a lot of cases, visualizing things ahead of time helps you get through certain areas. Like he mentions a couple prisoners of war who visualize things. One in particular I know, to pass the time, he would mentally play rounds of golf in his head for hours and days on end. And one of the first things he wanted to do whenever he was rescued, he asked to play a game of golf. And people were just stunned by that. It's like, well, he'd been playing golf for how long? And he beat a number of them. He was quite successful at that round of golf. Something to that whole process. But that's a thing that I want to do every morning, is just visualize how the day is going to go, so that it sets me up better for actually following through on that, though. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that visualization, that's really powerful. There's a study which, depending which search engine you find, it could either be the University of Chicago or someplace in Australia. But the basic findings were they had 3 groups of basketball players. The first group shot free throws every day for an hour. The second group didn't even touch a basketball, but they practiced mental rehearsal, visualization, and pictured themselves making free throws. Third group did nothing. And after 30 days, the first group improved by, I think it was 28%. The second group, which never touched a basketball, improved by 27%. And the third group obviously did nothing. So
they didn't even go backwards?
Yeah, that visualization is really powerful.
Yeah, no, I get it. Let's talk through ratings. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
I can go.
Okay.
So this book is definitely a meaty book. Mihaly is a really smart guy, and there's a lot to this. It definitely is not an easy read, but there's a lot of value here. It's definitely worth unpacking. Really glad that we read it. Really glad that this is now a part of my library. There's a few things that I didn't necessarily agree with or like. We talked about the family values, but overall, I think that there's a lot of value in this topic, and I think that devoting the time to understand it will pay immense dividends for just about everybody. So I can't give it 5 stars, I think, just because I still have a bad taste in my mouth about the family values thing, and like you mentioned, I really don't know what he believes on that, and I think it's a really important piece. But I got to give it 4.5.
That's fair. I would agree with you that I would say it's an easy book to read, but it's not necessarily an easy book to fully comprehend. So I think this is one that you could probably read a few times and get something different out of it each time, because it takes quite a bit of processing to get through it, which is a downside, because I would not recommend this to someone who was new to nonfiction or just learning about productivity at all, or even not even productivity, just trying to figure out what states of mental capacity lead you to being the most happy. So, those are things that I would recommend it to a lot of people, but there's also a lot of people that I would not recommend it to. So it would, we need to know each other, and I need to know you well enough before I can say, yes, you should read this. But if you're someone who has read a lot of the books that we've read, you'll be fine. It'll be good for you. There's some areas that he mentions that I just flat don't agree with, and that's primarily due to my Christian beliefs. I don't have 100% certainty that I trust that it's all true, because there's a lot of slipped in things and nuances that he mentions that I don't agree with. So anyway, that being said, I'm going to go with the 4.0 with this, and that is ultimately because I think the information in here is awesome, but at the same time, it's not super approachable unless you have a lot of background. So I don't think that it's one that I'm going to recommend to everyone again, but it's still a good book. So it's not like a 4.0 is a bad rating. So there we go. That's what I got.
Listen to you trying to justify the low rating for Mihaly.
I know, right? It's like, I feel like this was supposed to be a 5.0 book, but
it's more like a high 4.
Yeah. It should be.
It's like a 4.0 plus.
I just didn't feel like it got there.
All right. Next book that we're going to be going through, perfect book to follow up this book, because the last section in here is talking about meaning. We're going to be going through Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which I've started, and I am super excited about this one. This is one of those ones that is, I think, going to be very difficult to read. And I just read through the introduction, and he talks about how at the end of the introduction, he had a choice. He's living in Austria at the time. The Nazis are coming. They're going to put his entire family in concentration camps, and he gets approved for a visa to go to the U.S. and to write his books and to do his research. And he said that he had an opportunity to escape, but he chose to stay with his parents knowing their inevitable fate. I'm like, wow. So this one's going to be very interesting. And the main idea here, I'm sure people have heard of this before, is that your attitude really determines your destiny. You know, what your purpose is tied to, not what happens to you, but how you approach what happens to you. And so I really am looking forward to this one.
Yeah, and this, I should note, this one was mentioned on page 2 of Flow.
Yep. Yeah, right away.
Yeah, so it was interesting to me that when you said that this was the next book that you wanted to do for Bookworm, it was, I don't know, maybe 30, 45 minutes after that I actually picked up Flow to start it. So you had just said, we're going to do Man's Search for Meaning next, and then I'm reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I'm like, okay, great, that's awesome. So there's definitely an influence here in Mihaly's mind from this one. So perfect choice to follow that up with. Following that one, we might shift a little bit in how we talk about things for this one, but What's Best Next? This is by Matt Perman, and tagline here is How the Gospel Transforms the Way You Get Things Done. Now, we have talked about our faith a couple times with some books that are explicitly Christian. This one's probably going to go deep on that. The foreword is by John Piper, and it's one that has a lot of accolades that I've run across. I had it recommended to me by Chris Bowler, and he had I've got an email thread between him and Drew, and it's been recommended to me now a couple times since then as well. So I think it would be interesting for us to go through it and take the productivity angle that you and I have a tendency to bring up all the time and apply the Bible to it. So that's the goal with this particular book. We'll see if it actually lives up to that expectation or not.
So be forewarned.
Yes.
I guess that one will be explicitly Christian.
Yes. It's going to be hard to get around that one without going that route.
Yeah. Although at this point, you probably know exactly where Joe and I stand on a lot of that stuff. So.
Yep. We've already covered that.
You haven't scared you away yet, then. Yeah. All right. So my gap book here is an interesting balance to one of the challenging questions that I was forced to deal with in this book. And we talked about it with Work and Flow, like maybe I should work more. Well, my gap book is Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less, by Alex Suyung Kim Pang, I think is how you say this.
Well done.
I have this book already, but it's kind of, I'm expecting anyways, the opposite argument, which I think will be good in providing additional perspective and helping me land on exactly what I should be doing, when I should be doing it, etc.
Nice. My gap book is Stoner by John Williams. It's not what you think. I'll just say that. This was another recommendation to me. Drew Kaufman mentioned that this would be one he thought I would enjoy. It is a work of fiction, and it is about a man, William Stoner, who is a professor at the University of Missouri and has a rough life, and the trials that he goes through in his marriage, coming from a farming background, being privileged enough to get to university. This is set it starts pre-World War I and works its way through World War I. That's when it's set. So I don't know. It's an interesting story, and I've been enjoying it so far. So it's one I would recommend if you're into fiction.
Nice. And I know that you mentioned the book that you had chosen was a listener recommendation. I know there's a couple others on the list that are also listener recommendations. If you want to recommend a book for us to cover, you can do that by going to bookworm.fm/list, and you will see all of the books that we have covered so far, plus the planned books, the recommended books. And on the right side of that page, there will be a button to recommend a book yourself.
And if you want to support the show in any way, we're looking for iTunes reviews. Imagine that. And it's not hard to do. Just click the link in the show notes, and you can hit the review button there and review the show. So we would love to hear from you that way. But there's also another way you can support the show, and that is pseudo-financially, and that is by clicking any of the book links in the show notes, because those are all affiliate links that give us a little bit of kickback, help us pay some of the hosting for the website and such that run the show. So that would help us out a lot if you would just click the link the next time you're on Amazon.
All right. So if you're following along, the next book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and we will talk to you next time.